We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining. This is the October 2025 Wastewater Needs Assessment Advisory Group meeting. I'm Ariana Hernandez, a project manager at the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. Today we'll be covering an overview of phase 2 of the wastewater needs assessment. Let's go to that slide. And opportunities for feedback from the advisory group. In the second half of this meeting, we'll have some time for advisory members to provide feedback on the phase 1 report. But before we get into that, I'll hand it over to Danya Jemerson on the wastewater needs assessment team to introduce board member Morgan.
Thanks, Ariana. Good morning, everyone. I am Danya Jemerson, a senior engineer with the Division of Water Quality, leading the wastewater needs assessment from the State Water Board's perspective. So as you know, the Wastewater Needs Assessment Advisory Group plays a key role in shaping this very important effort. And we are very fortunate today to be joined by board member Morgan. And I think I didn't see it in the list, but Chair Joaquin Esquivel was going to join us as well. So their presence highlights the board's continued support and commitment to this work. So with Chair Esquivel leadership in advancing policy priorities, which has helped guide initiatives such as the wastewater needs assessment, and board member Morgan and her experience in permitting enforcement and financial assistance, along with her very determined passion for wastewater infrastructure solutions and the human right to sanitation, brings an invaluable perspective as we move forward into all the phases, the tasks from phase 2. So with that, I would like to invite board member Morgan to share her thoughts and her involvement with the advisory group and her ongoing commitment to the wastewater needs assessments goal. Thank you, Ariana.
And thank you, Danya, and good morning, everyone. It is an honor to join you all this morning. And thank you for all your time and valuable input in supporting the wastewater needs assessment. The State Board is deeply grateful for the advisory group's continued engagement. While this group is not a decision-making body, your feedback plays an essential role in shaping the wastewater needs assessment's direction and will be carefully considered as phase 2 begins. Given the importance of this work, the State Water Board must coordinate closely with other agencies, including Cal EPA. As a result, the review periods for documents may not always be ideal. We truly appreciate your understanding, flexibility, and thoughtful feedback despite these time constraints. It greatly strengthens the quality and impact of this effort. We're really looking forward to your feedback on the phase 1 report. The phase 1 report marks a major milestone for the wastewater needs assessment team and is currently undergoing your internal review. The State Board is expecting this report to be available to the public on or around October 31st, and accompanied by strategic communications and social media postings from our communications team. Phase 2 brings both opportunities and challenges, including identifying inadequate and at-risk wastewater systems, assigning solutions and cost estimates, and developing a 5-year roadmap with an ongoing implementation plan extending beyond the 2027 contract period. And with that said, let's dive in.
Hey, board member Morgan. As always, we appreciate your and the State Water Board's support and participation in the wastewater needs assessment efforts. Now we'll move on to what is to come for phase 2 of the needs assessment. The phase 2 objectives include completing a work plan for the following tasks: filling in data gaps, utilizing UMass's unsword model, which we covered in depth at the last advisory group meeting, evaluating and providing the results of the inadequacy and risk analysis, matching appropriate solutions for facilities and systems determined to be inadequate, identifying on-site sewage treatment systems connection opportunities, estimating costs, identifying affordability and financial capacity thresholds, and determining funding opportunities gaps, and finally developing a roadmap for ongoing wastewater needs assessment efforts over the next 5 years, or in 2027 over the next 5 years. This work plan and the following presentation is a guide for phase 2 of the needs assessment. The actual phase 2 work is subject to change, and the following material should be viewed with flexibility. As always, deadlines will be adjusted based on final data availability, State Water Board review periods, and the capacity of the project team. This is a brief or an overview of the timeline for phase 2. We just completed the work plan. Although the timeline shows phases 2B and 2C, the unskewered model and adequacy and at-risk analysis, starting in October, the teams have been working on these tasks for a while now. Similarly, the solutions and cost work will begin, although preliminary work has already began. In April 2026, phases 2E and phases 2F, the affordability and funding, as well as the roadmap efforts, will begin in 2027, but as always, we're already thinking about those efforts and encourage advisory group members to provide suggestions for future work or potential data sources that we can utilize through the needs assessment. Briefly, this summer, we created a work plan for phase 2, which covered a summary of tasks, ownership of the given tasks, tentative timelines, potential deliverables, and engagement points with not only advisory group members, but the state and regional boards and other stakeholders. And we'll cover essentially what was in the work plan in the next couple slides. We have maybe 2 minutes if there's any questions before we get into the content of the meeting. Okay. I'll hand it over to University of Massachusetts. Oh, sorry, Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, Ariana, I just wanted to mention one thing in one of the areas of the financing aspect of that chart. Could you go back to the chart for the timelines? Right there. Some of the work that we're doing in the preliminary will affect post-financing capacity and capability. You would think that we'd want to intertwine or include the roadmap for financing or affordability as a part of those pods and components that are happening in the front end. Because if we do all this research and planning and all this evaluation, and we don't have any understanding of what kind of financial limits or financial impossibilities those might create, I don't know. To me, it doesn't seem like it's like the cart before the horse. I just wanted to put that out there for everybody. Not a Debbie Downer, just wanted to say that sometimes you want to make sure you can find the money or have a good idea of, where the money is and the feasibility of the financing that could be available. Anyway, that's it.
Yes, thank you, Keith. And we'll get more into the affordability and funding and roadmap in the slides, but we definitely hear you. And although it says we're starting those efforts in 2027, we're of course thinking about them now and incorporating them into different aspects. And we're already considering work that is feasible now and work that is not feasible now that we'll need to incorporate into this roadmap. Go ahead, Joaquin, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you. I just wanted to say I appreciated the comment, Keith. And, when we did the drinking water needs assessment, it is helpful to say, okay, what does it take? One, what's the gap? And from there, kind of understand what the funding needs. But I hear you completely that what we know is that we're going to find a lot more funding need than we have actual current funding for. So what this really helps us do is make that case to be able to fund that gap. And just really appreciate that comment. And just wanted to say good morning and thank you everyone for joining all this. Really appreciate the great work that's going on here. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, yeah, I'll hand it to Nelson DeLuz from University of Massachusetts Amherst to provide an overview of the unsword model. But as a reminder, I think this part might be brief because we covered it in depth at the last advisory group meeting. So go ahead, Nelson.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here and be with you all this morning. So yes, I just wanted to give we covered it in the July AG meeting, but just to give a reminder to everyone of what at least the UMass part of phase 2B entails with the unsewered model. So to just give a brief description of that, what we are doing is developing a model that uses geospatial data and machine learning to predict at the parcel level whether properties require wastewater infrastructure, and then if they are unsewered or sewered. So you can see the diagram on the slide that kind of is just a visual representation of that. So in places where we don't know the coverage, we use our machine learning and our land parcel characteristics, tie all those pieces of information together, and then we are then going to be able to estimate unsewered and sewered coverage across California. In terms of the deliverables for this aspect of the project, we will be delivering standalone mapping of the unsewered areas in a geospatial data format at the parcel scale and supporting documentation given to both the Division of Water Quality for coordination with OEMA at the State Water Board for data transition and publication eventually, and then also to our colleagues at the Office of Water Programs as an input to the solutions analysis in the space of OSTS conversion potential as part of phase 2D of the project. And that is the brief overview, and I will pass it back to Ariana. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. Next, we can go into the other side of phase 2B, and I'll hand it over to Greg to talk about this.
Hey everyone, good morning. I'm joining you from a conference. That's my background here. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing to really identify where possible the boundaries of, but if not possible, the basic spatial location of the other types of wastewater facilities and system types that we're analyzing in the wastewater needs assessment. Again, those being the SSGO systems, sanitary sewer general order systems, as well as NPDS and WDR facilities. The reason why we are gathering this information is to, first of all, inform, in particular, the risk analysis in phase 2 that you'll hear about in just a second, as well as the solutions analysis for systems that are analyzed to be inadequate. But the spatial identification and location information will also be shared with the board and delivered to the board for potential other internal uses and public mapping, given that there are not full maps, especially of boundaries of these different types of systems and facilities in the public domain. So we've grayed out here in terms of sort of deliverables or what we'll be handing off to other parts of the team and to the water board, of course, the unsewered areas and mapping that Nelson just spoke to. But we'll in particular be able to utilize and we'll compile and utilize shapefiles that are being delivered right now by various utilities and systems of SSGO systems. Be able to utilize those in the analysis, but in some cases, some of those systems, utilities, we will not have shapefile data for fully in the timeline that we're working on. So with those systems, as well as I think the vast majority of NPDS and WDR permitted facilities, we'll be working with address location and matching to, in some cases where it's possible, other administrative boundaries like cities, looking also at the EPA's, US EPA's very recently released sewershed mapping tool across the nation, to again identify the best spatial information we have for our further analysis as well as for further board use. I do think in terms of spatial location, identification, and mapping, there is more work to do beyond the life of this project that will wind up being fleshed out in the roadmap. But that's all I have for now on the other components of the mapping and spatial location. So I think we can go ahead and open up the floor for questions on this component, unless Ariana, something else you wanted to say first.
No, I think we have time for one or two questions. I see in the chat, Keith wrote sewershed mapping ? Can we get a copy of that, please?
Yeah, I can put a link to that in the chat in just a second. The US EPA sewershed mapping.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Sure, thank you. I actually have two or three things. So Greg, I was curious when you asked about the locations. I know that all the permits come with GPS position points, so that might be that should have been downloaded as part of CWIC, so that might be partially helpful just on that part. But I also had a question if on the WDR side of it, you're treating treatment plants and collection systems differently. Is that what I understood correctly?
Yeah, first of all, we're utilizing the information in CWICs, and in some cases, especially with the NPDES facilities, there are actually some discrepancies between location information in CWICs versus other sources. So we're trying to identify the best information we have for each facility. But we are going to utilize, I guess, where it's possible to identify the sort of hide spatial nature of the treatment facilities to the collection systems, that same spatial information with respect to, like you said, I mean, WDRs and collection systems where it's possible. I don't know if that speaks to your question. Otherwise, we're going to wind up using address, type information.
Yes, it does. Actually, the question that I had even looking at the slides is, is there an intention to tag other data with the file? So whether it's treatment plan information, capacity, other things like that, or if it's a satellite collection system that comes in and is tagged with another collection system. Is that part of the project or not?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Is it about whether in any ultimate release of spatial information or mapping, we would be tagging other attributes of the facility and system that would be of interest? Just
Yeah.
because makes it, I guess I'm not sure we've fully determined, but I think we could do what you're suggesting in terms of making attributes, additional attributes of interest, sort of in the same files that are released for spatial location and mapping. But that would be more for public use and beyond the use of the analysis we're doing. So I think there's some room for discretion there, and we can explore that and provide all the information, especially that's public, in those same files.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Go ahead, Keith, and then we'll have to move on.
Hey, Greg, is there any way that you guys have determined whether or not the most impacted source of sewers or systems or non-sewered or sewered systems, whether the impacts of those to groundwater, either to groundwater or sources of water throughout the state that could ultimately lead to impacting groundwater? Are those kind of some of the elements that you can use or you guys use to make determinations on highest and best use of your time and efficiency in determining these maps and locations to analyze?
I think the answer to that, I'm not quite sure, but I think the answer is we are not able to do that within the scope of the project, but we can follow up. We will talk a little bit more about what we are and aren't able to do in terms of groundwater impacts in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Keith. Okay, and now I can hand it over to Grace to talk about the inadequacy and risk assessments.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. As usual, it's great to see you all. So the topics that we're going to cover for the inadequacy and risk assessment portion of this work is we're going to walk through the timeline, highlighting opportunities where the advisory group in particular has opportunities for feedback. We will talk about when we're planning to publish our methods, along with the publication of the final list. So all of my slides kind of go through a timeline. So we're going to start with the present day. So what we're currently doing in October, we are trying to finalize our criteria, thresholds, and weights for the inadequacy and risk assessments. So this is the stuff that we've been presenting to you all in past meetings that you all have reviewed. So none of this should be, brand new, but just we're finalizing exactly the wording, how we want to weight all these different variables, things like that. And I want to remind you all that we essentially are conducting 6 separate assessments because we're conducting an inadequacy assessment for sewer systems, NPDS, and WDR facilities, along with a risk assessment for each of those. So in total, you end up with 6. And the reason we did this is because they all have such unique attributes. And to evaluate them, we need to use unique criteria. It sort of gets at their vulnerabilities and ways to evaluate their adequacy. So I just also want to remind us about our risk assessment categories, because we've spent a little less time on the risk assessment than the inadequacy assessment. But generally, the categories that we're looking at for that assessment are socioeconomic risk variables, operational risk variables. So these are variables that are relevant to the system or facilities operational sort of functions, environmental risk, and then public health. So again, what we're working on right now is finalizing the thresholds for those variables, how they're weighted in the assessment. And if you're interested in seeing and learning more about what this process has looked like, I would recommend looking at the drinking water needs assessment. They have now done a risk assessment, for 5 years in a row now. So if you're wondering, what do we mean when we're talking about thresholds or weights and scores, I would definitely recommend checking out the drinking water needs assessment, their risk assessment in particular. So that's this month. That's what we're currently working on. And yeah, really looking forward to finalizing all this work so we can continue moving forward. In January of next year, we're going to have another advisory group meeting. And so this is where you all will hear about the finalized criteria again. These are not going to be brand new. This is not going to be brand new material for you all. You'll have seen a lot of these variables before. I think almost all of them you'll have seen before. But again, they're going to be sort of further refined and ready to actually be used in the assessments. We're also going to highlight the spatial analysis methods that Greg was just talking about, matching sewer shed boundaries to treatment facilities, estimating population served and other sociodemographic characteristics to those boundaries. And this is relevant here because for the risk assessment, we want to know sort of what the population that's serving or that's being served by a facility or system is, so we can understand that community's risk and vulnerabilities, along with the climate impacts that they might be particularly facing in their community. The next month, we are hoping to produce our initial list, our lists of inadequate and at-risk systems and facilities. So this is a huge goal. I think we can do it on our timeline, and this will be essentially the first sort of finalized version of these lists. Now, finalized is in quotes because then we're going to share the lists with the regional boards to get their impact. What am I trying to say? Their review. And we're hoping that they can let us know if there are systems that they think are missing from these lists, or that if there are systems that they think should not be on this list, or maybe there's a variable that's sort of picking up a system or facility for a reason that's not really making sense. So to have a human eye that really knows these systems, really knows these facilities, so they can closely take a look. We'll also be sharing the list with executive management for their review. And of course, with our partners on the wastewater needs assessment for solutions and cost work by the Office of Water Programs at Sac State. And then we also want to compare the lists that we generate to the work that was done by UCANR during their statewide survey identifying areas of concern, in addition to their field work that they've been doing, going out to communities and seeing what concerns the systems and facilities are facing. So this will hopefully help us understand if our methods are identifying areas that they know as experts in the field to be areas that have been struggling or will be struggling in the future. So the following month, March of 2026, we are hoping after that review process to have another list, another sort of more finalized list of systems and facilities, which will then be shared with the advisory group for review before it's officially finalized for publication. So there's a lot of different iterations of these lists, but the goal is that all the groups will have an opportunity for review before sort of the final publication. So in the advisory group that's occurring in April of that year, April of 2026, we, at that point, hopefully you all have seen the lists. And so you'll be more familiar with the systems and sort of how many there are, basic characteristics of the systems and communities, any trends that we've identified, things like that. So, hopefully before the meeting, you all will have an opportunity to review, and then we can share sort of broader summary statistics and findings from the lists. And then discuss our ongoing work, which is very broad, but there's always ongoing work. Some of which I'm guessing in April we'll be working on getting our methods sort of ready to be publicly viewed. And so GitHub is a part of that. And if you're not familiar with what GitHub is, it's a website, sort of a cloud-based website where you can upload your code for analyses that you've been using. So for me, doing the inadequacy and risk assessment, I'm going to upload my code there. And so that in the future, if folks either at the water boards or outside institutions are interested in looking at how we conducted the analysis, they can go to GitHub, they can publicly see that work and reproduce it if they're interested, or sort of build upon it. So this is just a way of us making sure that our methods and analysis are transparent and reproducible. Then in July 2026, we'll have another advisory group meeting, and we will discuss the publication plans for the list, along with the GitHub and how you can use it or access it. But I guess the one thing I want to note here is that this sort of July publication timeline is pretty broad. Really, the final list could be published sometime between like April and July. It's very broad. It just kind of depends on how long the review process really takes. Obviously, we have our own kind of idealized timeline, but things always come up. Review can take longer than expected. So I've put publication of the final list here in July just to give ourselves some breathing room. But even with this timeline here, like please take this with a grain of salt. I'm not exactly sure when the final publication will occur. What we do know is that we are planning to publish the inadequacy and at-risk system lists before the publication of the phase 2 report. So, phase 2 goes all the way into 2027, but we do plan to publish these lists before that. I think that's the very end. Yeah. So if folks have questions on this, raise your hand or put something in the chat. I'm happy to help. Jared.
Hi, good morning. Jared Voskel on behalf of the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. Thanks for your presentation, Grace. All of this is really important work, and it's great to see how it's rolling out and developing. I appreciated the adaptability that you've been communicating about this as it's going out into these really new forays with this really first of its kind analysis, and being open to where the work takes you and getting that review. You mentioned having the advisory group review it towards the end of March and then finalizing it thereafter. It would be appreciated if we could have maybe a little bit of an earlier look into it right before that finalization. If the intent was kind of like the phase 1 report, I think the advisory group got the phase 1 report mid-October, and then its comments are due by the 29th. And I think we heard at the top of the meeting, it's going to be published at the end of the month. So there's an element of like, as an advisory group member, that type of review feels like uncertain if it really makes a difference in what goes in the report. So as we're kind of looking at the list for the inadequate and at-risk systems, we would like for that input we would have as an advisory group to maybe inform that sooner than like a pre-finalization step. And then something, we were in a meeting just a couple weeks ago with kind of a different audience for CASA, and speaking to them, there were a lot of pre-treatment specialists in the room. They had noted for the inadequacy criteria for the treatment facilities, you use the significant non-compliance designation as a tool. And I think their comment to us, and I don't understand the intricacies of this because I'm not a practitioner working with these permits at an agency directly, but it seemed like their suggestion was that the SNC designations are really for industrial users. And so they thought we should be cautious with applying a category like that intended for that to wastewater's treatment facilities statewide, because treatment plants are not industrial plants, right? It was, I guess, the distinction they were recommending. And so I didn't understand that, but I thought, kind of given some of the prior dialogues we've had, it would be important to just note in this forum this kind of new item that was raised, and I think we need to explore it. And I don't fully understand it, but thought it'd be good to land on your radar. And so, and with that, thank you for all this great work. We're very committed to supporting you all in all your efforts, and really look forward to the final product. So thank you.
I'd love for Board Member Morgan to answer it. I'm assuming you have a response. Yeah.
Hi, yes, just wanted to respond to Jared's comment. Thought I would help you out, Grace, there regarding the the timeline. Jared, as I was speaking with the opening remarks, we're doing our best to provide as much time as we can to the advisory group here. Sometimes those timelines are truly out of our control. We do have other agencies that we do need to coordinate with and continue to move forward within the constraints of a contract. The contract has an end date, so we cannot expand past that end date. So we're working within some tight timelines here. And sometimes, we do need to do that coordination across other agencies, our sister agencies, including CalPA and others. There's many that, that this work does cross over into other agencies. So we need to make sure that we do our due diligence adequately and making sure that we are working with everyone. So we are doing our best. And so we really do appreciate and would appreciate, your understanding of that. We are trying to get the documents to you as quickly as we can with enough time to look at them and to provide some feedback. And then we also need to keep moving forward so that we can finish this work within the contract time.
Thank you. I will also respond and say that I totally hear you on the timeline, especially we really do want the advisory groups review on these lists. My thought with the timeline is it makes the most sense to get the advisory group sort of the final list. So after all of the review has occurred from the regional boards, from executive management and our internal team, then to get it to the advisory group for your review. And like I said, that timeline for the publication of the the final list is up for, it's sort of up in the air right now because we're just not exactly sure what the review process will look like, or how long it will take, as Board Member Morgan was speaking to. So yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, and we do really want your review. So yeah, that's all I can say right now is heard, and yeah, doing the best we can. I also want to acknowledge your comment about SNC because that's not something I've heard before. And if that is the case, that is very important to know. So I don't know if there's anyone else on the call who's more experienced in these sort of permitting nuances that could speak to it. But otherwise, I will just go back to the staff that we've been working with and ask them. But yeah, it's not something I'm personally knowledgeable on.
Yeah, I just want to note that we have been extensively consulting with a working group of staff who focus on these different permit types and compliance. So we will certainly check with them, but thank you for noting your understanding of that. And I know it's already been echoed in the chat as well.
Great.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to echo Greg's comment that the inadequacy and at-risk working group from the water board side, we have people from NPDES permitting, WDR permitting, and compliance and enforcement from the regional water boards and from the state board. So that's the database that they are using and rely on for their assessment. So I'm surprised that that has not come up, and that's what we are using to evaluate this methodology.
Room for research and investigation, which is what we're good at. I also want to quickly address, I think Debbie's comment in the chat about the UCANR areas of concern. What I mean by that is Sam Sandoval and the team at UCANR conducted a survey last year at this point, identifying communities that are experiencing inadequate sanitation access or wastewater system failures. And they also have been visiting those sites during the last year. And so we want to sort of see if our criteria is identifying some of those communities, because that would indicate to us that our criteria is it is accurately identifying systems that are struggling or facilities that are struggling or communities at risk.
Okay, thanks, Grace, and all the questions. For the sake of time, we do have to move on, but we will be having like a larger discussion point after all the teams have presented. So, but thank you, Grace. That was an excellent presentation. And now I will hand it over to OWP to go over solutions and cost.
Good morning and happy Friday, everybody. We're going to talk about solutions and costs. Most of this you've heard several times, and if you've read the Phase 1 report, you're familiar with it. Not much has changed. I'm just going to give you kind of a refresher of where we are or what we're doing, and then how, again, the timeline of things and how you guys can be involved. So first up, we'll remind you of the game plan for solutions for inadequate facilities and systems. Then we'll talk about looking at opportunities for OSTS connections, I'm going to update you on groundwater impacts assessment. We'll talk about what we're doing for costs. And then the key deliverables, we'll get into the schedule and milestones and things like that, and key input from you all. Next slide. Okay, so this is essentially the wastewater treatment facilities regulated by NPDES and WDRs. Recall that based on UCLA's criteria for inadequate, if those systems are inadequate, they come over and start getting run through to identify potential solutions. So keep in mind that this is a really high level statewide guess of what might be a reasonable solution. We're not getting into nitty-gritty site-specific details. It's just kind of a rough flow chart or matrix of, hey, these systems are inadequate because of X, Y, Z. And so our flow chart says that it would be solution A, B, C. So the types of solutions we're looking at for these cases include these various remedial actions. I'll remind you of what those are in the next slide. It's essentially infrastructure, so some kind of construction replacement of equipment or components. We're also going to be looking at maybe the remedial actions might just altogether be too costly and we should just rehabilitate the entire facility. But then we can also look at, hey, it's feasible to connect a facility to an existing facility. So 3 general types of solutions for the treatment facilities. Next slide. Okay, this is a little more detail. In the phase 1 report we presented before, we have this kind of matrix. So on the far left, it's not intended to read in detail, but the matrix essentially says, okay, what's the violation category or the inadequacy category? Why are these systems inadequate? And then we've assumed a cause for those types of common inadequacies. And depending on what facility type it is, we assign these remedial actions. So that might be I&I repairs, it could be installing a storage basin or a treatment pond, etc. So then when it all comes together, we've identified what those remedial actions is based on the inadequacy, and then we're going to be comparing them to the cost of a full facility replacement. We'll also be looking at the feasibility of connecting the facility to another facility, and then depending on our little flow chart there, we'll go with that final set of solutions. Next slide. Okay, moving on to collection systems. This is a little bit simpler. The solutions we're assuming there, because most of the inadequacies are because of some sort of spill from the collection systems. So the types of solutions would be either a focused, meaning just a section of piping, or maybe entire piping area that needs to get replaced or rehabilitated. Also be looking if replacing a pump station is needed. And then we're including solutions possibly for operational things. So maybe the system needs spill cleanup or some kind of extra maintenance or inspection equipment, etc. SCADA systems. So we'll be including kind of a line item cost for that. Next slide. And then finally, for all these systems and facilities, we are considering administrative solutions. So that might be in the form of technical assistance, where a provider comes out to kind of troubleshoot or help with an application or address monitoring operational issues, etc. There's also, in certain cases, there may be an administrator that could be appointed by the State Water Board. And then other cases, if there's a facility that needs to be upgraded or upgraded to a higher level, we'd include a monetary allowance for a contracted operator to come in. Next slide. Okay, moving on. This is the OTS connection opportunities. So essentially like the septic system type scenario. We are going to be doing a mapping. So we'll be taking the data that UMass, looking at the unsewered parcels that they give us. And we're going to be looking for kind of grouping of of those OTS locations or OSTS locations. And when we see a grouping together, we'll be looking at maybe we could connect it with an existing sewer system. So we're calling that the septic to sewer scenario. In other cases, it might be too far away from existing sewer. So maybe we could put in a community cluster system, like some kind of package plant. Next slide. Okay, so that's kind of the solution stuff. This is kind of the biggest update we have for you on the groundwater impacts assessment. Lots of discussions with water board staff and various stakeholders, including yourselves, and we've decided to discontinue it. So recall the groundwater impacts assessment was going to be looking at pulling nitrogen data that's available from GeoTracker, so from monitoring wells. And we also came up with a methodology for estimating nitrate from parcels in the absence of actual measured data, and then looking at various site characteristics such as soils and rainfall patterns and that, and trying to say, hey, there's, put in a conceptual level of high likelihood, low likelihood, unlikely to be contributing to nitrate impacts in groundwater. This initial idea was not this methodology, the groundwater impacts assessment, was not part of the initial wastewater needs assessment scope. We added it because we did think it was something we could maybe do a rough mapping effort that could help information across the state for all these different regional organizations and programs that are trying to kind of look at these nitrate issues. But again, with all this different conversations and ideas that we had, when we heard really from stakeholders was that they're looking for more of a diagnostic tool. So really, it's going to take a lot more to talk with all these individual groups and regions to understand where they are, what they're doing, and what they need specifically. And unfortunately, there's just kind of a budget constraint since it wasn't originally in the scope. All that coordination is going to be a lot more than what we can do. We're going to focus on our scoped tasks for this effort. The good news is that we have documented the methodology very well. It still needs a lot of refinement, but it's in that phase 1 report. And so we are planning to just kind of hand it off. And it'll be included, I think, probably as an appendix. So it's a placeholder there for water board or others to consider in the future. And that's where we landed for now. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to costs, we've talked about the different solutions in that, and it's essentially kind of a flow chart. So really, we've been going through engineering reports and pulling, literature reviews and that to come up with line item costs for all these different solutions that we've been talking about. Let's see. From there, with all the, and we're in that process right now. We've gone through all the engineering reports. We have all the data, and now what we're trying to do is say, okay, the engineering reports called this solution this, and then how do those fit in with our assigned remedial actions or various solutions? So we're lining those up, and then we're going to be putting in for operation and maintenance. We'll be assigning a net present worth. We're going to be converting normally using things to $20, $25. Maybe we'll do 26, 27 as the years go by. And then there's all these cost multipliers we want to be doing, looking at, what are the regional differences, accounting for inflation. We'll have looking at adding in electrical costs and contingency and overheads. It's a method that's also done in the drinking water needs assessment. So we have a good kind of a standard practice for that already. And then each facility or system then is going to end up with a total solutions package cost. And then we'll be adding all of those together statewide to come up with the full for the full statewide cost. Next slide. Okay, so this is where we're hoping to get in information to you and share with you. So 9 months or so from now, July 2026, we'll be giving an update on our methods, so probably digging in a little bit more to the costs that we continue to compile. Recall, based on UCLA's schedule of inadequacy, a lot of our work depends on when we get that data from them, as well as the UMass mapping. So we're looking at getting something to start working with in March. And so look for July during an AG meeting. We'll be presenting on what we've done, and then we'll come back to you that following October, a year from now, and let you know how we're progressing, how we've refined things. And then we're looking at about April to present the cost results. And then there'll be final documentation in June 2027 is when the final phase 2 report is. And we will be delivering the facility and solutions spreadsheet. So that's kind of, the decision making. It's essentially a program of how we got from the inadequacies to the various solutions for each system or facility. We'll be including shape files for the OTS connection. For OTS connections, GIA should have been removed from this slide since we're not moving forward with it. And then there'll also be spreadsheets for the cost data, the cost curves, and all those results in that. I think that's it, and I can take questions now if there are any. I think there was one in the chat, maybe. Keith, go ahead.
I'm just curious as to on the pullback of the nitrogen assessment. Could you go back to that slide? Because that cost is that's a redundancy possibility under Sigma. I think under Sigma, the nitrogen management plans that lie underneath Sigma could offer a lot of information and data that could be inputted there and utilized. I don't know if there's a necessity to have redundancy in that. I'm just curious. I'm really glad you guys made that decision to pull that out.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, as we got into it more, we realized that folks are much farther along and have really individual needs, and it sounds to be a lot more of those regional specifics that folks want to get into that would be of value. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
And was there a question in the chat, maybe? Let me see.
I think Khalil answered it.
Okay. Jared?
Hi, good morning, Maureen. Just that looks really exciting. Great work. Really cool to see the flow model and what you will be applying to it. I feel like it would be really good to connect with Debbie Mackey because I have a feeling some of her members will be the kind of people you want to make sure it's tailored to, and she probably should be able to provide that insight to help you as you're refining that tool. But really exciting to see. Great work.
Thank you, Debbie. We will be in touch. Thanks, Jared.
All right, with that, I think we can move on to the next section. But yeah, thank you, Maureen. And I think I'd pass it right back to you.
All right. So this is phase 2E, and it's the funding gap analysis and affordability. And so funding gap analysis is really going to kind of mimic the drinking water needs assessment method. So once we have all these solutions and costs, we are going to compare it to existing funding or forecasted funding. And so we'll be working closely with DFA on what their knowledge is for the future years of what that looks like. A lot of unknowns, of course, these days. And just to clarify, we are only looking at the state funds through the State Water Board. We're not looking at, we will not be looking at rates or facility revenues or EPA or other federal grants or opportunities like that. We're only going to be looking at the state, and that's really just subject to the limitations and unknowns of others, the limitations of the scope for this project. So essentially, the funding gap will tell us, we'll take all those modeled costs, and then there are projects that are likely are addressing some of the inadequacies that are already known for facilities. So when UCLA runs their model and comes up with some inadequate facilities or systems, some of those are already probably getting support and have funding, so the costs for those cannot get removed. And then we'll additionally remove the projected funding that DFA has for the next years, and that'll be the resulting of the funding gap. And so that schedule for learning what that's all about will follow the costs, and well, it might lag a little bit. Maybe it won't have much to share with you in that July 2026, but likely, give you another update for a year from now in October 2026. I think that's all I had.
Yeah, so in terms of affordability, really the goal and what we're able to do is assess community ability to pay for solutions identified, for systems, for communities relying on systems and facilities that are deemed to be inadequate. So we'll be characterizing disadvantaged community status, severely disadvantaged community status, per the board definitions using median household income, as well as poverty prevalence status for inadequate facilities and systems. This will allow us to do, as again, really following the drinking water needs assessment terminology and method, assess potential community ability to pay for the cost of solutions or the residual costs that are not able to be funded or paid for using state funding sources. This will be called sort of local cost share, or the remaining cost that has to be paid by local community members in the absence of other funds. Do want to caveat that we will not have. We tried to see if we could. I know both the board and advisory group members were helping to see if we could collect wastewater system rate and charge data, but those don't exist currently across the state. There's no venture since 2018 that's out there, and they're not going to be able to be collected for analysis under this effort. So we won't be looking at sort of the impact of cost of solutions on existing rates. I do want to note that the drinking water needs assessment does not do this either. But one distinction in terms of affordability is that between the wastewater needs assessment and the drinking water needs assessment is that because we don't have data, there are not data on rates and charges, both on sewer system bills as well as on property tax. We can't conduct a standalone affordability assessment a la what has been done under the drinking water needs assessment, because we do not have the data to do so. That will, collecting that data and analysis of that will very much be, I think, of interest and featured in the roadmap. And I am optimistic, although not certain, that can be done in the future. But in the timeline that we have here with this first wastewater needs assessment, we will again only be able to focus on community ability to pay for solutions and sort of local cost share aspects. But I see Board Chair Esquivel, you have your hand raised, so I'll let you jump in.
Thanks, I appreciate that, Greg. I just wanted to add, when we first did our first drinking water needs assessment, this was an issue as well. That is, we certainly were able to have a better rates data, but the issue of having gaps in data. So do know that an important part of your exercise here is to identify not just, okay, what, the assessment and the data we have now, but really those gaps. And that, not unlike this issue, you will come up against others where you're finding there is just a lack of data to be able to move forward. I think of the nitrate work as well. There it's also a mix of a lot of local work that's going on. So all that to say, this, is an important component, really getting a handle on understanding rates across, access to sanitation, and is something that the board can then follow up on. So just wanted to, for those that, I know this is can seem like it might be a significant hit to some of the work, know that it isn't ultimately, because part of this work is just even understanding where we have data gaps, because we've never undertaken an exercise like this. So anyway, just wanted to add that, and thank you.
Thank you, and I think we can now open up the floor for questions or comments on affordability, and funding. Keith?
I think you're really going to run into a lot of walls with just rates. I think you may have to have a solution that encompasses maybe thinking outside the box and coming up with some kind of a bonded issues or even offshore issues or reaching into corporate pocketbooks to help offset some of this stuff. Just to throw that out there, you know, as we study this stuff, you understand, Greg, that the costs just multiply. I mean, they just continue to raise. Cost of everything raises, and as you study these, you do these studies. By the time you start the study, like high-speed rail, you end up with another $50 billion tagged on because of the time it took to do the study. Anyway, just to
Yes, thank you, Keith. Any other questions or comments? Didn't see any other hands raised or comments in the chat.
This is Oscar, to kind of go on the same tangent where Keith stated, are you taking into account the potential funding gaps for projects that are already coming down the pipeline, and kind of what that would translate into, requesting additional funding for these projects that are already, shovel ready, so to speak, and what that would mean in terms of potential delays for requesting additional funding, because, as he mentioned, time is money. So the longer we wait to get these projects done and completed, the more they end up costing.
Yeah, I think the answer to that would be we will be looking at, I think Maureen perhaps could speak to it in a little bit more detail. We will be looking at existing funding sources and allocations to existing projects under those funding sources. And yeah, sort of what is the term? Encumberment or commitment rather than just the overall numbers in those funding sources. So we'll only be trying to look at sort of available funds. And yes, we don't know what the results will be, but I think everyone expects that there will be great need and there will not be existing funding sources sitting there that can immediately address all of that need. And certainly hear both your comments on how costs just continue to rise, and that impacts the total dollars needed, as well as the general affordability concerns, of course, that residents are facing. So appreciate all of that. I don't know, Maureen, if you have anything to add, though, on looking at existing funding sources.
No, you said it perfectly. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg, and thank you, Maureen. Now we can go into the last task for phase 2, which is developing a roadmap, as we've referenced throughout this presentation. We will be developing an internal report for the State Water Board with analysis of focus areas for future needs assessments. And in addition to that, we'll be developing a public roadmap for ongoing efforts. We're hoping that the advisory group can help inform this work on what future iterations of a needs assessment could look like and future considerations for the State Water Board. Next, we just have the schedule for phase 2 advisory group meetings, but the next slide is a little bit more interesting. So this is a tentative plan for what we will be presenting at the advisory group meetings for phase 2. This is, of course, subject to change based on needs assessment, project team capacity, changing deliverable deadlines. Luckily, unlike phase 1, we have more meetings with advisory group members in phase 2, so we will be able to cover the phases and the tasks multiple times with the advisory group to receive your feedback, like I think Grace demonstrated in the inadequacy and risk analysis. You guys will be seeing that material many times and through the iterations of it all. And in addition to advisory meetings, we will be hosting the monthly office hours, except when there is an advisory group meeting. We have a schedule that will be the last Tuesday of the month. We don't have a set time at this moment, but it will likely be 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, since that time seems to work. And it has worked in the past. Right now, I don't have a December advisory group meeting on the schedule just because of the holidays. But depending on interest, we can schedule one for early December if advisory group members and projects team are available. But right now I can pause for questions, and I just want to open it up so that if there's any other questions about other aspects of the presentation today, if you would like to ask them now, or we can stick to questions on the roadmap or advisory group meetings, office hours, involvement. But yeah, I'll pause.
Ariana, there was a question from Carlos in the chat. I think he said your mic is not working, but I can take that. The question is, how is project prioritization being factored into affordability and cost projections? So the short answer is not. The Division of Financial Assistance, recall from their Clean Water SRF, has an intended use plan that they issue every year that lays out the prioritization in that. So I imagine, we'll be giving the State Water Board a list of here's all the systems, here's the general costs and everything. And I imagine the State Water Board will be having to do some homework of what do we do with all this now and how do we prioritize. Some of that'll come from the IUP the DFA puts out, and others will be to determined by the Water Board.
That was for your question. Yeah, any other questions on the phase 2 work plan in general, or any questions folks have before we just have I'll go over what the next steps are and then we'll have a break. So now's your chance. Like folks are needing a break. I know we've been talking for a while. Okay, so I just wanted to go over what we'll be covering our next advisory group meeting. We'll be reviewing mapping data gaps that Greg previewed earlier, as well as an update on the inadequacy and risk analysis. So now we could take a break. The next session of the advisory group meeting will just be discussion on the phase 1 report. If you have any feedback you want to discuss verbally with the team, or any questions just regarding the phase 1 report. But yeah, let's meet back at 10:45. That works for everyone. I'll go ahead and pause the recording, but yeah, thanks everyone for the discussion, and thanks to the team for the presentation. Okay, I hope everyone had an awesome break. Give folks a second or so to come back to their computers. Okay. So we sent out the phase 1 report to advisory group members, I believe last week, with a feedback review sheet. We also wanted to provide some time now for advisory group members to provide verbal feedback if they are interested. We provided the report to you all, but we're still copy editing on our side and responding to some last minute feedback. So we ask that you provide any feedback to us by October 29th, and to please do that through the comment sheet. And this meeting, we have it set so that it's supposed to end at 12:15, but depending on discussion, we don't need to make it go that long. But yeah, I'll open up the floor. If there's any questions or clarification folks need, any surprises in the phase 1 report, or any additional considerations moving into phase 2. And feel free to unmute or just raise your hand. I could also post these questions in the chat if we prefer just to see each other face to face rather than having these slides up the entire time. I'll say thank you to folks who have already submitted the comment sheet. We appreciate that. Go ahead, Debbie.
Sure, hang on 2 seconds. Let me try to get this. It's not going to do it. Okay, sorry, I can't get one. Oh, there it goes. Okay. One of the things, and I think we've been saying it all along, but I think it's also really important to recognize in the report, I know it's in the data gap, it really focused more on the data. I want to say the data that was available, but I think since the beginning we've been talking about how there's a greater wastewater needs. And I think Greg at the very beginning had said, hey, EPA has some numbers, they have some numbers. There's other things that are out there. We've talked about how current or really upcoming permit requirements are a absolutely huge need that's not going to be recognized as part of this project. And I know in the Central Valley, we have current regulatory processes that are in process with CV salt and other things that are going to be a huge need that are not, that may not already be captured in here. And I know it's a data gap, but I also think because the purpose of this study, sorry, you're going to get my cat. The purpose of this study is to try to get to the needs, is to be really upfront and say, hey, this is what we did. And we're really, in some ways, a lot of the effort has been looking at septics and some of the smaller system needs, and they are across the board. And as we look at affordability and other things, it's both a big and small issue. And so I would say that I've got a lot still to read and to go through this, and I really appreciate. I don't want to undermine that. I really appreciate the work that's doing. I'm glad that this effort is moving forward, but there's an elephant in the room that's not being acknowledged in some ways, and I think we need to do that.
Thank you, Debbie. And yeah, we definitely hear you on that. And this is the first iteration of the needs assessment. And this is definitely something we want to include as well in the roadmap and future iterations of the needs assessment moving forward, for what is feasible for the State Water Board to do or future contractors for a needs assessment to do. I'll pause if any other wastewater needs assessment team members have a comment or staff have a comment on that. Could throw it to Jared then.
Sure. Just wanted to echo Debbie's comments there and just kind of commit our, ability to support this effort. And I think there's some readily available, low-hanging fruit type of activities we can help support to kind of get that global piece of it, while also continuing in this advisory group role of supporting the more detailed look that you all are doing really at these communities. And this is really important for us as CASA and Civiqua and the other summer partner organizations to kind of capture both components of it from the 75,000 foot level as well as at the 100-foot level. So let's have more conversations during the office hours on how we can support you all as you're thinking about this. Thank you.
Jared. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I wanted to express my appreciation for the paper and for this presentation today. A lot of very, very thorough thought, and I'm glad to see the change on the groundwater impact assessment. On the cost, I understand you don't have the current rate structures, and I'm not completely sure, but I'm hoping that you will be able to estimate the monthly or annual cost per connection or cost per gallon, the operating costs of each of the actions that is proposed. It's kind of the internal cost in the solutions is going to be very important, even though you can't really tie it to the current rate structure and therefore to a complete affordability analysis. Will that be done, the cost per gallon or the cost per connection to operate year in, year out?
Yeah, we are including O&M for those, again, it's going to be for the systems that are deemed inadequate, but the O&M is going to be included for, yeah, as far as the overall funding need. Yep.
And will that be the incremental O&M or the total O&M?
It'll be a total O&M across, I think, I forget if we're expanding it for maybe like a 20-year O&M or something like that.
So if it's it's costing something to operate now, and you're going to do a repair, a technical assistance, or any of the different things you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
and that will either raise or lower the O&M. Presumably, some things will lower O&M,
Correct.
and some will raise it. Okay,
Yeah.
that'll be really helpful to understand. Thank you.
Hey, Paul. Thank you, Maureen. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, Maureen, I think like we're out here in Easton. Just to give you an estimate, like we were out in Easton, so this gives you a ballpark idea. We're trying to just hook up to Fresno City. The analysis was, hey, let's try to deal with the lower income areas that are close enough to the city to make it feasible to just reach out, for the city to just reach out with the infrastructure and pull them in. And that one project that started 15 years ago was basically abandoned about 8, 9 years ago. And the projected cost to the homeowner was going to be between $67 and $120 a month increase in there in a septic fee and a sewage fee assessment or a rate, and it got rejected basically from the people that majority of the people there lived on fixed incomes. But looking back at that project now, those numbers and those prices are pretty cheap compared to what it's going to end up being 10 years from now. So, yeah, it's all relative.
Yeah. I'll just clarify, we're not going to be at the point of saying, what is the impact on rates for people, as Greg mentioned, for the affordability piece, but we are including kind of a general O&M cost for each inadequate system or facility where we're assigning a solution.
Keith. Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, any other questions on the phase 1 report? Or additional considerations for the phase 2 efforts? Go ahead, Keith.
So on the air board, I sit on the EJAG for Air District, the Valley Air District, and it's like these competing hands that go in. It's almost like the equivalent of being a god sitting there trying to listen to everybody's prayers. Everybody is requesting the money, so it's a definite challenge. It's a definite challenge, but we're still in the positive side of it, and on a positive note. So I'm not being a Debbie Downer. It's the air district was able to clean the air in Fresno to a point where I think that the current population and the old timers that have been there for years, since the 40s and 50s, have realized that the program was very expensive. But now that our kids can breathe clean air, and people can breathe clean air and get rid of the stigmatas that were associated with the PM2, 2.5 PM2 and 2.5s particulates, that they now see the program as a worthy cause, and it's worthy of the expense to get it done, because it's just sometimes we get at a point in our life, just like these wastewater systems and the Sigma and the water that we're dealing with now. We got to have water. Everybody's got to have water, and everybody has waste when they have water. So dealing with these issues up front now and being bold about it, I think, is a great opportunity for us and for Joaquin and his team to try to come up with solutions, and using these types of studies to do it is an excellent opportunity for us all to learn and grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Okay. I'm not hearing any other questions or comments on phase 1 report or future phase 2 efforts. So that's all the material we have for today's meeting. As a reminder to please submit any comments you may have on the phase 1 report by October 29th. And the next advisory group meeting we'll have is in January, and the next office hours we'll have is in November, and I will be sending out the Zoom link and calendar invite for that today. So look out for that on your calendars. But I just want to say thank you to our advisory group for your participation and showing up on a Friday and spending so much time with us. We really appreciate it. As well as to board member Morgan and board chair Escobar. We really appreciate your support and coming to these meetings. And thank you to the project team. Appreciate the work you do as always. And then, sorry, I see Keith has his hand raised. I'll let you.
Hey, just Ariana, real quick, for anybody who hasn't participated in these, are these 1 hour sessions that you call in for the
office hours?
Yeah, the office hours.
Yes.
That's like a 1 hour session. Do you guys actually you see a lot of people getting involved, and how's it kind of work? How's it structured? Could you explain it just a little bit?
Yeah, we just open up a Zoom meeting, and it's just for the wastewater needs assessment project team and advisory group members. And so it's an informal time. The project team does not prepare any materials. You just come with your questions or thoughts, considerations. And yeah, we've had a lot of fruitful conversations, usually about the previous office hours, or the previous advisory group meetings. But yeah, we see advisory group members come with their ideas, their clarifications, questions, and yeah, it's very informal.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. But with that, I hope everyone has a great Friday. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Happy Friday, all.
Thanks, Ariana.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin. Thank you.